Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to begin focusing on some of the more social theories that discuss crime from more of a behavioral perspective rather than a biological one. Social learning theory is one of the strongest theories that we have in our arsenal. It's considered a general theory of crime, and what that means is that it can explain juvenile delinquency and adult criminality, and it's able to explain the differences between male and female crime, and it can explain all types of behaviors ranging in between, from binge drinking, drug use, carjacking, internet-based crimes, homicide, sexual assault, robbery, and pretty much anything else you can imagine. It's one of the most steadfast theories that we have, and researchers are constantly using Aker's social learning theory to predict a variety of different behaviors, as I just mentioned. However, before we get into Aker's, what we have to do is discuss Sutherland. And one of the things I'm going to discuss with you later on is the Sutherland family theoretical tree. Academics take great pride in who their mentors are, the structural foundation in which they are trained, and how many times students continue the work of their mentors, sort of as a way to stay connected to the discipline. So if we're starting with Sutherland, we have to first discuss Sutherland as being this father of modern criminology, and he's very much recognized for the term white-collar crime, and in addition to the development of differential association theory, as I'm about to explain. He's the head of this theoretical family tree, and it really all takes root with his conceptualization of differential association theory. And differential association theory is really a learning theory, and Sutherland maps it out in ways, or sort of maps out the ways in which criminal behavior is learned. And he has 9 elements to the theory that are all listed in the Akers, Sellers, and Jennings textbook. And basically what he says with differential association theory is that first, criminal behavior is learned, just like we learn anything else, right? When you're little and you learn how to tie your shoelaces, the same types of learning mechanisms that teach you how to tie your shoelaces can also teach you how to rob a bank or hijack a car or whatever it else is that you're going to do that is criminal in nature. We use the same learning mechanisms to learn deviant behavior as we do non-deviant behavior. There has to be someone available to show us or to teach us, and we have to place some sort of relationship, or I'm sorry, some sort of importance on that relationship with what we have with that person. So it can be our parents, it can be our mentors, it can be teachers, it can be anyone else, but normally when we're talking about differential association, that importance is being placed on our peer groups. So we have an important relationship that exists with our peer groups, and then in addition to that, we have to first be in favor of violating the law. I can learn very strongly, very quickly, how to crack a safe, right? But if I have no desire to ever want to go out and actually rob a bank, these skills are useless to me. And Sutherland says when all of these things are combined, eventually we will engage in the behavior ourselves. So we learn how to do it, and then we actually go out and do it. After Sutherland's death, his student Donald Cressy kept researching. He was trained under Sutherland and learned everything he could possibly learn from his mentor, and after his death, Donald Cressy kept continuing work under the Sutherland paradigm, and he continued to develop and expand differential association theory. He worked up in Oregon, and he took on a man named Robert Burgess as a graduate student while working in Oregon. And Burgess was more classically trained in his undergraduate work in psychology and identified more with Bandura's version of learning theory rather than Sutherland's. However, as Burgess continued to work with Cressy in his doctoral work, in an attempt to modify differential association theory, the two started to recognize the opposite directions that they were sort of headed in. Because remember, Burgess was more of a psychologist than he was a sociologist, and Cressy identified more as a pure sociologist. So the two started to branch off a little bit. On a fluke, Robert Burgess was talking to a fellow graduate or fellow PhD student named Ronald Akers about the difficulties in the project that he was doing with Cressy and how these two were starting to divert in terms of their research interests, whether I want to keep this purely sociological or I want to go down the psychological route. And as Burgess was talking to Akers, Akers said, this sounds very interesting. I think I'll help you in the work that you're doing. So the two, sort of on a fluke in a conversation, decided that they're going to start working together and they're going to try and develop more of this psych-based theory of differential association. So here is where we start to see the very first sort of thin layer of foundation that we have for the more modern version of social learning theory being born. Okay, so back to our family tree. We start off with Sutherland. Sutherland's graduate student was Cressy. Cressy then takes on both Burgess and Akers as fellow graduate students. All four men are developing and sort of focusing on different psychological and sociological aspects of the theory. The original social learning theory that Burgess and Akers developed have roots with both Sutherland from the sociological and Bandura from the psychological. Okay, so they're incorporating the conditioning aspects of Bandura's theory, and they're also tying in a little bit of Skinner's operant conditioning ideas, and then they're incorporating them into Sutherland's work. The two men are keeping differential association at the core of the new theory, but they're also including things like reinforcement as other central elements. And reinforcement is very much a psychological based element that they're including in the theory. As the story goes, after the development of social learning theory, Burgess and Akers start to have the same sort of developmental squabbles that Burgess and Cressy were having. Burgess wants to continue to take it down the psychological route, and Akers, as a more trained psychologist or sociologist rather, says, I have no desire to keep going down that route. I think sociology is the way we want to go with this. And the two sort of part ways very much the same way that Burgess and Cressy have done in terms of their development of the theory. So Akers is now on his own, right? And never one to be content with anything in life. Ronald Akers decides that he's going to take the original version of social learning theory that he developed with Burgess, and he's going to bring it back home to sociology. And he says there is something about number 7, the 7th element of Sutherland's original 9 tenets. And number 7 suggests that differential associations may vary in frequency, duration, priority, and intensity. And that's the central core element of differential association theory. That's where he's going to take it, expand it, and that's the centralized element of social learning theory as we know it today. To this day, Akers still promotes that number 7 has to be the most important thing that researchers focus on, right? And one of the things that I never understood is that as we're talking about the development of this theory, I've known instructors in the past that only focus on the Burgess and Akers version of social learning theory. They never go above and beyond that. And what I don't understand is why they choose to stop, because the two theories are radically different. And when we're talking about things in a criminological sphere, we cannot keep including the psychological elements of it because we are not psychologists. We are criminologists, and yes, to a tiny little extent, the psychology is important, but we're talking about things in a more traditional, purely criminological standpoint. We have to go with the standalone version of Akers, right? Sutherland laid the foundation, but Akers is what is taking us forward. Okay, so as we're moving forward in Ron's version of the theory, he states, and I want to quote him here because he knows his own theory best, right? He says, quote, "The same learning process in a context of social structure, interaction, and situation produces both conforming and deviant behavior. So the same environment is producing one or the other, is producing both types of behavior here, okay? And he continues, the difference lies in the direction of the balance of influences on the behavior. Okay, so here's where his elements are starting to come in. Social learning theory indicates that criminal learning occurs through four means. One, differential association. So the same types of elements that we're seeing with Sutherland are translating over to Akers. One, differential association. Two, differential reinforcement. Three, definitions favorable or unfavorable towards law violation. And four, imitation modeling. All four of these need to occur in order for someone to learn the behavior, right? And I want to go through each of these individually so we know a little bit more about what Ron means here. First, differential association remains very similar to what Sutherland was talking about before. We learn criminal behavior by spending time with delinquent peers. In our youth, think about your own upbringing, whether it was deviant or non-deviant in nature, right? Everybody goes through a similar trajectory growing up. In our youth, we spend the most time with our immediate family members or our caretakers, right? When we're young, we're wholly dependent on these individuals. As we grow older into adolescence, we don't want to spend as much time with our family members, and instead we want to spend more time with our peers. So the people that we go to school with, who are living in our neighborhoods, our immediate peer group, that's where our interest is at. And as we're growing up, we tend to place more of an importance on those peer groups than we do on our family networks. By the time we get to high school age and college age, we're spending the most time with these peer groups, and we're placing the most importance on our associations with them. So think of it this way. If you are spending the most time with pro-social peers, then you're likely to be pro-social yourself. If you're hanging out with delinquent peer groups, then you're more likely to be a delinquent than you are pro-social. These peer groups can even extend into virtual environments through internet-based means like social media platforms. However, think about it as we continue this thought process. Even if I am predisposed to delinquent behavior, right? Maybe there's just something that I really want to go out and do. But my primary friend groups, my peer networks, are all pro-social. If you're in this adolescent young adult phase, you put a lot of importance and place a lot of stock on what your friends think about you. So even if there's something that you want to go out and do, right, you're probably not going to do it because it's not something that is approved of or validated by your friend network. Differential reinforcement, on the other hand, is referring to the balance of punishments and rewards that can either encourage or discourage an individual from committing future criminal behaviors. Differential reinforcement comes in either positive or in negative forms. Let's say, for instance, that I used heroin for the very first time and I enjoyed the high. I used other drugs before. I met some people that had some heroin and they convinced me to try it for the very first time. I really enjoyed the high. I used the heroin correctly. Everything went off. It didn't make me sick, right? So that is a form of positive reinforcement. This positive experience made me want to do it again. That's positive reinforcement. On the flip side, let's say the very first time I tried heroin, things went drastically wrong. I very nearly overdosed. I got very ill. I had a very bad experience. This experience made me never, ever, ever want to do heroin again. That's negative reinforcement, right? So depending on the outcome of the behavior that I try or of an experience that I've had, it's going to hold a certain amount of weight with me, and it's going to have a strong influence as to whether or not I'm willing to try this behavior again in the future. Definitions favorable or unfavorable towards law violation is one of the huge ones that Akers promotes within the theory. And next week we're going to talk about social bonding theory, and we're going to talk a little bit about how definitions is very closely related to Hershey's version of belief. Okay, so Definitions, favorable or unfavorable, is going to have a large impact on pretty much everything that I do. Think of definitions really as the foundation of my moral belief system. If I hold unfavorable definitions towards law violation, meaning that I only desire to follow the law, then I'm not going to break the law even if my peer associations are delinquent in nature. Favorable definitions encourage me to break the law and make the behavior acceptable in nature. Definitions are sort of rooted in our moral and our religious and our conventional types of values, right? These are considered general definitions. I can break it down further on an individual basis into specific definitions, right? So I might be okay with drinking underage, or I might be okay with smoking pot, which is an illegal behavior for underage kids, or it's an illegal behavior for most people in states that haven't gone legalized yet, right? However, I'm okay with these things, but I'm not okay with using crack. I'm not okay with using heroin. I'm not okay with using meth. I don't believe that we should be able to use the harder substances. So all of these behaviors across the board are illegal, right? But in my mind, there's different grades to it. And there's different levels to what I might find acceptable. So these are definitely things that are created and rationalized on an individual basis, right? I have to find out what I'm okay with and where I'm individually crossing the line for definitions here. And then finally, our last element of the theory is imitation modeling. And this is the moment in time where I, as the individual who is learning, actually has to go out and commit the crime or engage in the delinquent behavior. So this is the idea that once I learn what I'm doing, now I have to go out and actually do it. I'm engaging in the behavior after watching someone else model the behavior for me, or I watch and learn from someone else. So think of it this way. All right, here's my next example. Let's say I'm a young high school student and I've never had alcohol before. Never drank underage, nothing. This might be my first time. So I get invited to a party. It's at a friend's house. All my friends are drinking. No one's gotten sick yet. It's early in the night. The cops haven't been called. It's a rather low-key kind of affair. We all have a good time. I decide that I'm going to drink. Everybody goes home safely. The next party I attend, because I've had this positive experience and I've had positive reinforcement the very first time, I see all my peers doing the same thing and nobody else has had a negative experience. Next time, I'm going to do it again, right? Or next time I might do it for the very first time because nothing happened to the collective the last time that this encounter happened. So I'm associating with delinquent peers because everybody else is drinking underage. Positive reinforcement took place because nobody got sick and the police weren't called. I'm not morally opposed to underage drinking, so my definitions toward law violation are in place. And now all I have to do is finally imitate that behavior, right? I essentially learned how to underage drink through my peer associations by attending this party. Pretty simple type of conceptualization, right? Akers suggests that social learning theory is a general theory of crime. It can be applied to any and all types of delinquent and criminal behavior, as I just exemplified. Over the years, Akers' theory has been tested empirically, and it remains one of the strongest criminological theories that we have in our field to date. Even though Ron's version of social learning theory was first published in the 1970s, he has worked continuously to improve the theory over the years in terms of measurement and empirical validity. He's even taken steps to introduce social structure into the social learning equation. His students have also helped him work on this endeavor. So here is where we go back to the Sutherland family tree. I already told you that Sutherland is sort of the roots of the tree, right? He gives way to Cressy, who mentored Burgess and Akers, who came up with the original version of social learning theory. After Ron Akers got his PhD, he started working at Oregon for a few years and then made a university change and went to go work at the University of Iowa. While at the University of Iowa, Ron mentored two men named Marvin Crone and Lon Lanza Caduce, who were both PhD students working there at the time. He also mentored Christine Sellers, who was getting her master's degree at the University of Iowa. These names might all sound really familiar to you, and if they don't sound familiar to you right now, they're going to sound familiar to you by the end of the week when you finish getting through all of your readings. Christine Sellers, who I just mentioned, is the co-author of the Akers, Sellers, and Jennings textbook that we're reading this semester. After Ron left the University of Iowa, he traveled down to the University of Florida and started working there. Christine Sellers decided she was going to follow Ron, transferred universities, and she worked to get her PhD at the University of Florida while he was there as a professor. Christine Sellers, after getting her PhD, got a job, went to a couple different universities, but eventually ended up at Texas State University, so not too far away from us here at UT Tyler. Marv Crone and Lon Lanza Caduce also ended up at the University of Florida as faculty members years later. So now we have Ron, Lon, and Marv Crone all at the same university, and they're all coming from the same family tree in terms of theory. So this week what I've had you do is you have a journal article that Ron wrote with Marv and Lon, and another one of Ron's students as well. And they wrote this article together in the 1970s. So we have all of these students bouncing around. They're all working with Ron Akers, their mentor, and they're all working to consistently develop his theory over time. Christine Sellers in particular really, and she's still working with Ron to this day even though he's now retired, but Christine in particular was instrumental in the development of social structure, social learning theory, which I talked about before, and that theory states that social structure elements such as age and gender and race and family structure and neighborhood dynamics and environmental factors all work together to have a mediating effect on the social learning theory variables that are presented in Ron's original solo theory. Okay, so I know it's getting a little complicated here, but I'm about to muddy it further. So, like I said, Ron has these students everywhere, and these people that I'm mentioning are just the very tip of the iceberg. But I'm doing this purposely because I want to show you how these branches of the tree are extending. And so Ron has these students like Marv and Ron and Marv and Lon and Christine. And once these people get PhDs and they start working as faculty members, they start taking on their own students. So while they're at the University of Florida, Ron and Lon Lanza Caduce are helping to mentor Wesley Jennings, who is the third co-author of your textbook, the Akers, Sellers, and Jennings text. He bounced around for a couple universities and is one of the biggest names in the field right now, but he landed at Texas State, and he's now working with Christine Sellers. So Wesley Jennings leaves UF for the University of South Florida in 2009, and 2009 is the same year that yours truly enrolled in the UF doctoral program. And my mentors are Ron Akers and Lon Lanza Caduce. I then meet a follow graduate student named Danielle Tolson, who then got married and is now Danielle Tolson Cooper. We became best friends and writing partners, and we had the same doctoral committee that was led by Lon and had Ron as a committee member. Okay, right? So I told you this is why this is one of my favorite ones and how I'm personally connected. So we both get our PhDs. I come here to Texas. She's up in Connecticut at the University of New Haven, and we keep publishing and working together to help advance social learning theory as well. And this week, because I always think it's really cool when I can bring in some of my own research that's actually relevant, and it's not just me saying, look how great I am, even though I am, right? But I really wanted to bring in some of my research because it's timely, and it shows the advancement of a theory through these strong social networks that are constantly evolving in academia, right? So this week what you're going to do is read one of the pieces that Danielle Tolson Cooper and I have put together that focus on social learning theory as one of the main theoretical predictors for pornography use with gender differentials. And it's a really good piece. We're really excited and proud of this one. Um, but not only do I want to show or tell you this story because I'm proud of the academic pedigree that I come from, but I also want to tell you this story because even though you see part of what we do as academics, you don't see the networking and the interwoven links that we all have together. And one of the jokes that or not really a joke, but it's one of the things I always say about academia is that it's very, very inbred. And it's sort of the truth, even though it has a little bit of a little note of irony there. But really, when you're talking about all these folks, they're like, you could play 6 degrees of separation with any one of us, and eventually you will get back to somebody who was mentored by somebody super famous, right? And you'll eventually get back to one of the major theorists within the discipline. So Ron, I've known Ron for about maybe 15 years at this point. And Ron finally retired in 2014, which was the same year that I moved out here to Texas. But even though he's retired, he is still writing, he is still researching. He just published the new version of the textbook that I'm having you guys read in this semester in the class. It's the brand new version or brand new edition of the textbook. But what is so inspiring about Ron is that he has to probably be, I would say, at least maybe 85, 86 years old at this point, and he is still sharp as a whip. And that's because he's exercising his brain daily, because he writes every single day. And I wish I had the ability to write every single day, but I just don't have the time for it the way that he does. Maybe when I'm retired, right? But he just loves what he does, and he is so passionate about his work. And that's one of the primary reasons why we all wanted to work with him. People flocked when he was still working. They would flock to the University of Florida because they wanted to be able to say, I was mentored by Ron Akers. It's a very proud thing to be able to tell other people, because they always have a great story about him, or they always have something interesting that they want to ask or talk to him about. And you know, I told you at the beginning of the semester that I'm a classically trained theorist and I love theory, and Ron is one of those reasons why I love theory so much. I took almost every single theory class that I could from him, and I was his teaching assistant for a while, and I used to love the stories that he would tell us. And you know, if you've ever met Ron Akers, he's just the sweetest sort of Mr. Rogers-like guy. Is a teetotaler and does not drink at all. But when he was up in Oregon, he used to spend all this time with Timothy Leary, who was one of the biggest advocates for LSD use in this country in the 60s and 70s. And he just used to hang out with Timothy Leary anytime he would come to Oregon, and he would try and learn as much as he could from him, because Leary was also an academic, and he was just very interested about the power and the dynamics that he would have over his followers, right? And he would also tell stories about how he and Travis Hershey, who we're going to talk about next week as the creator of social bonding and self-control theories, them two would get into huge fights over social learning and social bonding theory, and they would do so at conferences, and they would go to one of the hotel bars, and like I said, Ron didn't drink, but Travis would, and them two would just sit down over a cocktail and an iced tea, and they would duke it out about the role of parental attachment and whether or not that should play a role in the theory, and whether or not Travis Hershey should just give in and make his theory a social learning theory because Akers' theory trumps it, right? And they were best friends. They were very good friends over the years, but they would have these knockdown, drag-out fights about their theories because each one were so passionate about what it is that they do. So like I said, we gravitate towards him because Ron is good at what he does. And his theory makes the most sense, at least to me. I consider myself a social learning theorist. It's what Danielle and I use the most and we publish on the most consistently. And that's because of Lon and Ron and their mentorship skills. And I would not have made it to where I am, or I would not be doing what I'm doing today without either man and their huge involvement in my academic career, and I would not have them as mentors if it was not for Sutherland and his woefully underdeveloped theory. So I guess I really have him to thank, right? But it really goes to show you that timing can sometimes be everything. And the networking skills that you make in grad school and that you use to your advantage can set your career, right? They can put you on a career path in which you can further promote the ideas and theories of those brilliant people that you just love and you want to be mentored by. And you guys are really the next generation of criminologists. You're the one who is learning these things for maybe the very first time, and it's now up to you to find your niche. And it might not even be social learning theory, and it's okay if it's not, but you have to find that niche and you have to take this forward, because eventually Ron's going to be gone, right? And eventually Lon and Marv Crone and all of these big names, they're going to be gone and they're not going to be doing this anymore. And it's up to you guys to keep their vision and their passion and their work alive. So off my soapbox now. But you can tell that I just am following in their footsteps with the passion for the theory, and I just love to work with it. So anyway, next week, let's talk a little bit more about where we're going in terms of course content. Next week, we're going to jump into another pretty prominent theoretical family tree, the control and bonding aspects of criminology. And like social learning theory, social bonding theory also has its roots in psych-based literature. And Travis Hershey really worked to expand it into a more contemporary version of the theory, which we now know as self-control theory, that he worked on with his student Michael Gottfredson. And so what we're going to do next week is sort of make our way through those theories like we did today. And next week we'll figure out what Hershey and Akers were fighting about all the time in those bars with those iced teas. So I thank you all for your time and your attention and your hard work so far throughout the semester. And I will see you all next week for the very next lecture. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Bye.